Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to Skid Row Explained. Now this is going to be really interesting for me. Like, I've got several friends who have visited LA, and when they come back, they are literally shell-shocked, flabbergasted at the scale of Skid Row. They tell me it's literally thousands and thousands of tents, you know, just almost like a town of homeless people. It's insane. I've seen pictures here and there. I watched a video about a year ago of a guy just like briefly showing footage, but I really want to understand it. Like, why hasn't the government or, you know, the powers that be in that area, why haven't they tackled this to try and resolve the situation? I don't know how they would do it, but maybe some kind of subsidized housing, or I don't know, but there's got to be a way. So this video here, I'm hoping it's going to really break it down and explain to me like when this began, why it was allowed to just continuously build, and if anything's being done to kind of deal with this. So it's going to be really interesting. Let's do it.
Dark history for the Cecil Hotel.
Is there something evil going on here?
There's a neighborhood in Los Angeles that we need to talk about. It's called Skid Row. Last month, there was this really popular true crime documentary on Netflix. It was like the #1 most watched show here in the United States and maybe around the world. And it was about this hotel that was right here in Skid Row. It's about a 21-year-old Canadian woman who disappeared after exhibiting some very strange behavior in an elevator. And yes, there's going to be plenty of spoilers here.
The Hotel Cecil is haunted and it's got some sort of uncanny force.
The show is haunting and confusing and thrilling and an appalling and insensitive abuse of the power of documentary filmmaking. The whole series feels like a true crime documentary, but there ends up being no crime at all. And the whole energy of this series is founded on the idea that this hotel is haunted with dark energy.
I think that we're hoping for a ghost because
Have any of you guys
it's
watched
what
that
we've come to expect.
I'm here to tell you that the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles doesn't have dark energy. That's a tantalizing but very lazy explanation, and it exonerates the people and policies that built modern-day LA. Instead, there's a much bigger story here, one that the documentary decides to largely ignore or mischaracterize. The story worth telling here about this hotel and the neighborhood in which it resides is the story of how cities draw boundaries. These subtle borders that are meant to contain the city's least wanted people. Once you understand what this looks like and how it happened in LA, you can understand how it happens in a lot of cities.
It blows my mind because Skid Row, I'm sure, is extremely close to, you know, areas where property are, you know, in the multi-million-dollar valuation. You know, like, imagine owning a $5 million, I don't know, apartment or home in some area in LA, and literally 5 minutes down the road is Skid Row. I don't know how I'd feel about that, really.
And it helps you understand what's really going on with the Cecil Hotel.
It's the story of a city and a microcosm of the American dream.
Wow, man, look at
Okay,
that.
first, let's establish what and where the Cecil Hotel is in LA. Here's downtown LA, and you have this financial district here with all these big buildings. A few streets over, you have the Cecil Hotel, right on the border of this 50-city block neighborhood called Skid Row, right in the heart of downtown LA. Go to Skid Row today and you are quickly brought into the plight of basic survival for nearly 5,000 homeless people.
The reason why there's so many tents out here is because people can't afford to live in a house.
Wow.
Nearly half of them are considered to have serious mental illness, and life expectancy here is 48 years old, 30 years less than the US average.
Because yeah, like the hygiene here must be quite poor. Like, are there like public bathing houses that they can use to wash? Like, how do these people keep clean? Maybe a gym membership, maybe that's how.
This small block of streets is surrounded by highly developed districts that every year become more shiny and more expensive. So how did Skid Row, this one small block of downtown, become where so many of the city's sick and marginalized gathered?
Look at all the trash.
Way back when California was first taken from Mexico to become part of the United States, loads of Americans were moving west, moving to California. Some of them were looking for gold, and some were just looking for a new start. The US used to be really good at railroads, and they built a railroad across the entire country. That railroad ended right here in LA, right in the location of modern-day Skid Row.
There is probably no single area holding so much of charm and beauty and the good things of life as Southern California.
So you have a lot of people arriving around this train station looking for work. This area developed a reputation as being full of transient people coming to the West with dreams of gold and a new start, and instead ending up with neither. No jobs, no homes. It was a part of town that no one wanted to go.
Los Angeles County has a gregarious fun.
Wow, so that's the lineage, the history of it. You know, a lot of people are just not able to find their feet, so you know they maybe just stay there, they hunker down there, and then it just grows and grows and grows. Wow, that's interesting.
Zone where everybody has a good time.
As LA grew, so did the bad reputation of Skid Row, and so did the homeless population. The neighborhood was sort of for the untouchables, and when anyone considered helping them or figuring out a policy to solve this, people resisted. One columnist of the day wrote, quote, "Don't help this class. It is a crime against the community to do so."
What? Whoever wrote that, I mean, just a completely heartless individual with no empathy. Why wouldn't you? Because if you can get them to, you know, elevate themselves, they become taxpayers. You know, it helps out the state. This is just backward thinking.
The Cecil Hotel was eventually constructed in the 1920s, right here on the outskirts of what was becoming this undesirable part of town. At the time, it was a grand hotel, built for business travelers. What turned the Cecil Hotel from this to this wasn't dark energy or mysterious forces, nor was it the fact that U2 played a concert on the roof right next to the Cecil Hotel in the late 80s.
Wow.
No. What happened to the Cecil Hotel is something that happened to this whole neighborhood starting in the 1970s. When city planners and politicians started re-envisioning downtown LA, drawing lines on maps to contain the growing population of mentally ill and homeless. The goal here was to bulldoze all the decaying buildings in downtown and to make way for a new business district full of tall, shiny buildings.
It's just crazy to me that rather than deal with the problem, they just thought that they could build around it and, you know, charge these astronomical prices in terms of property valuations. I'm surprised that the property valuations are so high. You know, I'm imagining London with 5,000, you know, homeless people all congregated in one area. It just wouldn't happen here. It just would not happen here.
The original demolition plan included Skid Row, but the community leaders fought back, saying, listen, City of LA, if you demolish Skid Row without solving the underlying issues, you're just gonna have a bunch of smaller Skid Rows pop up scattered throughout the city. Homelessness isn't gonna go away if you just bulldoze the neighborhood. The city was like, yeah, you have a point. So they agreed upon setting firm borders that would be the quote containment zone, where the homeless and mentally ill could stay so that the surrounding neighborhoods could build nice big office buildings without the presence of these undesirable populations.
If you ignore the problem, it doesn't just go away. Oh my God.
Within Skid Row, they constructed public bathrooms and benches and public spaces so that, as the city officials said, those amenities could, quote, act as a magnet to hold the undesirable population elements in Skid Row.
Wow.
Undesirable population elements.
That's incredible.
That is just a fantastic way to take human beings and turn them into units.
Honestly, some people there's real psychos out there who literally don't value life. You know, they just value, you know, money. You know, it's just incredible. Incredible.
So weird. Even though the borders of Skid Row, based on the city plan, were not like walls, they were just city streets. But the city planners made sure that they would have, quote, strong edges that will act as a buffer between Skid Row and the rest of the central city. They promised that when Skid Row residents enter the buffer, the psychological comfort of the familiar Skid Row environment will be lost. So how did they do this? One way they did this is with harsh lighting. Back in the old days, they had these historic lights on Main Street, which is one of the borders of Skid Row. They replaced those with like harsh prison lights to make it very just unpleasant to walk across the street. They put locks on the trash cans in the surrounding districts so people wouldn't leave Skid Row to come scavenge for food. Residents of Skid Row also reported that police officers would be patrolling these borders, and anytime someone would cross, they would be approached. Yet they would be left alone for a time if they stayed peaceful within the containment zone.
This is gnarly. This is like some, I don't know if you guys have seen the TV show Black Mirror. This is giving me Black Mirror vibes. So if any homeless people like leave the containment zone, I'm guessing, are they like apprehended and then just brought back in? Is that what happens? Isn't that weird?
All of this happened throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s as rent prices started to go up all throughout this area. So rent is getting more expensive. At the same time, funding for mental health institutions was drying up, and the war on drugs propagated by the Reagan administration was also heating up. Skid Row literally became a dumping grounds for mental health institutions who would drop off patients right here, knowing that they would be contained. The idea of saving Skid Row by drawing borders around it came from the community leaders of Skid Row itself. It was a solution to keep affordable housing, keep the community intact, but soon this solution was used as an excuse to neglect the people within these lines. Street cleaners and trash collectors came less frequently than in the rest of LA. City maintenance for streets sort of stopped showing up. But the one city resource that did show up in abundance was the police, whose job it was to keep these, quote, undesirable population elements within this zone.
I'm trying to think, how could you solve this problem? Because I guess ultimately the people of Skid Row, they need to want to, change their lives. You can't force them to do that. But I'm sure a lot of them do want to change their lives. I'm sure a lot of them do want to beat whatever addiction they're suffering. How would you guys deal with this? I'm trying to rack my brain, to be honest. It's a difficult, complex problem. So I do have sympathy, I guess, for the city officials who did this, but I don't think they tackled it the right way. Seems a bit ethically wrong.
Criminalizing the poverty inside these lines. And yes, here's the Cecil Hotel, right within these firm containment borders. So if you look at the Cecil Hotel under this lens, you now see the danger, the drugs, the violence, not being caused by some creepy dark energy that lured in this woman from Canada. Instead, this was the result of a policy, intentionally creating borders within the city to keep the city's problems contained into one area. A spot that had real culture and community values and history. And yet, because of these dehumanizing policies, Skid Row became defined as a series of statistics and social problems. What I've found by looking into these policies is that this wasn't an inevitable course of action. The city could have put its money and effort behind the harder thing to do, which is addressing the underlying issues of unemployment.
Because I've heard that the city of Los Angeles or whatever it is, if it's a county, I heard they take in a lot of tax. It's one of the highest, if you live there, you pay a lot of tax. So they must have a lot of money. Why can't they tackle this? Or are they spending a lot of money on trying to tackle this issue, the Skid Row issue? Are they investing in mental health institutes, drug rehabilitation facilities, stuff like that? Are they, people who live in LA, are they trying to solve this problem, or are they kind of ignoring it? Where is the money going?
Employment, mental illness, drug addiction, and unaffordable housing stock. And yet the policy they pursued was fixing this problem with a Band-Aid, using policing and the power of redevelopment. The real problems were swept under the rug to be dealt with another day, keeping the city's problems contained neatly in this border and hiding them from view.
It's shocking, honestly. Like seeing the footage of Skid Row, it really is, it's shocking. Like here in London, you'll see, you know, there are homeless people here, but you'll see maybe one or two, like, you know, and they'll be maybe sat outside a grocery store or maybe next to an ATM, or, you know, you don't see them in huge, massive numbers like you see in Skid Row. You know, and I'm not saying that we deal with our homeless better. I don't know. I don't have that information. But it just makes me wonder, like, I do think that LA could be doing more. You know, there's so much wealth in that place. There's just huge amounts of wealth. I'm sure that the problem could be solved. Or am I being naive, do you think? Am I being naive? Obviously, I don't live in LA, so I don't have first-hand information. Like everything that I know about the situation is via second-hand sources, you know. So, but yeah, people who live in the area, what would you do? How would you deal with the problem? And where does the blame lie? You know, and what are the solutions? Like, let me know. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.